All right. So today we are doing the flying geese, and you saw what I did the last time that we did ombre. So the biggest focus is playing with the ombre. So you can see where we went from light to dark. Okay. I'm going to show you two different styles of ombre. Um, so we got this style of ombre that will go the whole width of fabric from dark to light. So everybody sees
Ooh.
that the whole width goes from dark to light. That is one style of ombre. And it goes from salvage to salvage. Another style of ombre is, there it is. It only goes halfway through the fabric. So it'll only go to the salvage to the center. So if I open this up, there's Melody. So if I open this up, notice I have dark on this one salvage end and then dark on the other salvage end. So I'm going to talk about how we could play with the ombre fabric that either only goes halfway through the fabric or all the way from salvage to salvage. So from light to dark. So Melody just came in. Melody, recap real fast. We're going over two different types of ombre, from salvage light to dark, end to end, or just to the center. So this goes from dark to light to the center. So the pattern calls for you to cut a 4.5-inch strip. So I'm going to move this over. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this, fold it in half, and then I'm going to fold it in half again. I'm going to use the Stripology ruler. I don't know if anybody has ever used that, but that's what I'm going to use today. But you can use your regular ruler. So if I cut it into fourths, which this makes it easier for you to see on our little camera up here, you can either take your regular ruler, you can use either one, and you can cut up. We're going to cut a 4.5-inch strip, but I'm going to show you about the Stripology ruler. So I'm going to place this here, and I am going to cut a 4.5-inch strip because that's what they call for. So our Stripology ruler allows me to make the two cuts without moving the fabric. So there's my 4.5-inch strip. So where it's talking about, so if everybody wants to follow along, you can turn to page, here on page 39. It talks about here, in the book, it tells you to cut your, so from the 4.5-inch wide, it tells you to cut a 2.5-inch strip, skip an inch, cut a 2.5-inch strip, skip an inch. Well, I calculated for this pattern, we can get a total and not a total out of here of 12 pieces. So we could actually do 2 strips on this. And then also alternate it. So what I'm going to do is, okay, wanted to make sure that was not somebody in the class. All right. So I'm getting this lined up. I'm going to put my ruler on here. And what I'm going to do is, because we want to be able to see a variance in it so that I could get more out of the fabric and not waste that 1 inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to skip an inch. I am going to cut 2.5-inch strips. And on the Stripology ruler, I just follow the markings. So on the Stripology ruler, has these markings for every 2.5 inches. So I'm just going to cut my 2.5-inch rectangles. And I do kind of have an extra piece here on the end, which is fine. But what I did, so that I can still get the space, I don't want to sew this piece next to this piece. I want this one to be next to this one because it's going to be slightly lighter in color. So I'm going to take this, so I want to skip spaces, if that makes sense. So I'm going to take my first one, skip one, go to the next one, and then skip one, go to the next one, skip one, go to the next one, skip one. Now I have to go to the bottom piece. So I'm just going to kind of, so then I'm going to go here with the 2. I'm going to go pick these up, and I'm skipping every other one. To put my pieces together so that now I have enough pieces to be able to make two 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 rows of the flying geese as opposed to one. So it's a way that if you want to make another one with the flying geese and the ombre, you can. So, and you can see here where there's enough shade, slightly enough shade, where you can get the color variation between your pieces. So you can see a subtle difference. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I can honestly take this one, pair it up with this, and you could pick your pieces and get your 6 out of there. So that's what I did to try to maximize my fabric and get 2 rows. Does anybody have any questions on that? Should I go? I just want to make sure that's clear and not too foggy. If I'm working with the ombre fabric that is only halfway up, so it only goes halfway through the fabric, this I'm going to have to skip the 1 inch. So if you're using, so I'll show you on the regular ruler for those who have not used the Stripology. And I just had that regular ruler here. There it is. So you're going to come in and you're going to cut off the edge. I've already cut this one to 4.5 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is, if we're using a regular ruler, if I was using the Stripology ruler, I would come in with the Stripology ruler and I would line it up and I would cut 2.5 inches, cut an inch, then 2.5 inches, cut an inch, 2.5, so on and so forth. If I'm using a standard ruler, because some of you may not want to use or don't have the Stripology, if I'm using the regular ruler, I'm just going to come in, cut a 2.5 inch, and then cut it an inch off. So now I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut an inch off. Then I'm going to cut 2.5. The reason why we need to, I'm going to reiterate that what's important about skipping is because then you can see the subtle change. You can see that this part here is slightly darker than this one. So you really get a good visual of how it's changing in colors. It's giving you better ombre effect, especially with this that's only on half of the fabric. So now I'm going to cut another inch off here. And then we're going to do another 2.5 inches. Like that. And you're just going to keep going on down the fabric and doing that. And then you'll have 6, but you'll have a reverse side. So you'll be able to get 2 rows out of 1 strip. So if you had a fat 1/8, you only get enough for 1 strip. But if you're using a 1/4 yard, you're able to get 2 strips out of it. Now, the next question comes into play is, I told everybody that I was going to use the AccuQuilt cutter. All right, so I am using the 8-inch cube. On the 8-inch cube for the AccuCutter, you're going to use die number 4. Let's make sure we turn this. So we kind of have a glare, but it says die number 4, which is your 1/4 square cuts. On the 8-inch cube, you have 4 in a cut. On a 9-inch or larger, which your flying geese would end up being larger than the pattern, you only have 1/4 inch cut. So you can put that on there. We are then going to use die number 5, which is your small half square triangles. And what this will do is it will cut off your dog ears. Well, I don't want, if you notice, if I took my ombre fabric and placed it on this die cut, and there is no skipping, notice that I would cut a piece here, and then the triangle would be going the opposite direction, which is not what we want. We want them to all, we want the color to be going from dark to light on every piece. So the bottom would be the dark piece, the point of the flying geese. So let me show you on the quilt so you get the idea. We want the bottom to be darker going to lighter. So we want this to read dark to light. If we're using the AccuQuilt and we do it reverse, you might see where on this flying geese, it would start going dark to light here, and then you're not going to get the effect. So what you have to do then is on this one here, so that it cuts nicely in the, I'm sorry? Did someone, oh, I thought somebody asked a question, sorry. I measured here on the die, I need to cut this at about 3 inches. So it cuts out. So I'm just going to so this is for the flying geese using the 8-inch cube. You could also use the 9-inch cube or the 6-inch. The 9-inch you wouldn't have to. You still want to be careful about fan folding. You're going to want to cut your strips out on the cube. So I cut this at 6 inches wide because it's going to be trimmed. And now I'm going to cut 3-inch strips. On here. Now, I have this fabric folded, so I have light on the back. So I got to remember that this is going from dark to light this way. So I want this to be dark at the bottom, and I'm turning this so dark to light. So I want dark at the bottom, dark to light, dark at the bottom. Well, this was the underneath. So it's going from dark to light, dark on the bottom, dark to light, dark to light. So I'm putting dark to light on the bottom. And then all I'm going to do is just run this through the cutter. So I'm going to take these pieces and I'm going to get them even. And I'm going to place them on the die running even with that. So I'm going to place the fabric at an angle to run with the angle of the die. And we want to make sure that right here, it's covering where the tip is, it's going past that, and it's going past the bottom, so it cuts everything off. So I could do up to 6 layers, which all we need is 6. But again, doing it this way, I could still get 12 pieces out of this. I'm just going to put my mat on there. And run that through. So here is my center of my flying geese. So these are my centers, which on these would be my centers. Now, when I'm using the AccuQuilt for this one, my background, I have the 1/2-inch squares. Again, I am going to take my background fabric, and depending on which way you cut it, I'm going to take the background, fan fold it over, because this won't matter, because this is not ombre. So I can fan fold that. And these will be my outside pieces. So what I'm cutting right now are these pieces here, my background pieces. Okay, So what I just cut out there is my half square triangles, and this is with the AccuQuilt. So I'm keeping those and those together because that's my AccuQuilt cuts. Now, you could also use your rectangle cutter and this one, but then it's the same process that we are doing, but it's the same process. It's just that this won't take off the dog ear. So you could cut your rectangles, which will resemble what we cut out with the ruler. And then our background pieces are going to be 2.5-inch squares. So your cube has the exact same thing to be able to cut out your 2.5-inch squares and your rectangles. So this rectangle cuts at 4.5 by 2.5, which is what we cut out with the ruler. So you can cut it out this way also, and then follow exactly like with the book.
Thomas?
Yes.
I'm a little confused then. Your background fabric was not ombre, and the fabric in the book, the background is ombre.
I just used a variation of colors. But if you, okay, so if you do use the ombre on the background that they did in the book,
right,
they mixed it up. So you can see here in the book where I'm not going from light to dark or dark to, they're randomly spread up.
Okay.
So
yeah, I see that now.
So if you're gonna use an ombre for the background, so good question, Marsha. It won't matter what direction it's going then, because you just randomly put them on there. This is just scattered. So you're not gonna follow any kind of light to dark print for your background.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You can use an ombre, but what I did instead, I just used a bunch of scrap pieces of cream. I just used a bunch of different shades of cream to get my background.
Okay.
So I just used different shades. None of them are, that's where it kind of gave me the light and dark. So I had some a little bit darker than others, but I did not use an ombre. But I did not just use 3 or 4. I used about 6 to 8 different colors for the background fabrics to get that look.
Okay.
Thomas,
Yes.
on the dies, you used 4 and 5, but what were the rectangle ones and the square ones? What numbers?
Thank you. I forgot to tell you that. So if you want to follow them to cut exactly like they do in the book, die 2 is your 2.5-inch square, and this is based off the 8-inch cube. You would use die number 2. To get your rectangles that are 2.5 by 4.5, you're using die number 8.
Thank you.
So you have the cuts, and that will follow exactly like they do in the book with die number 8. I just wanted to show you how we can get rid of the dog ears and not have to cut off the fabric in excess. So the next thing is I need background. I forgot to show you this. So my background pieces for cutting it with the ruler, I cut a 2.5-inch strip, and I'm going to use the Stripology ruler again. This goes a little bit faster. I'm going to come in and cut 2.5-inch strips. And I have my ruler upside down. That always helps to have it right side up. So I'm going to cut 2.5-inch squares for my background. So this would be my background. And when I'm doing on the demo part, I'm having several different colors of pink. So my sample one, so here's my different colors of pink. So if you're going by the book, now what you have to do with your background piece, you're going to turn it over and wrong side up. With wrong side up, I am going to take this. This does not matter if you use an air erase, wash away, or a chalk pencil, or even a pen, you're not going to see this. This is not going to be seen. So we are going to, again, turn the 2.5-inch square background fabric right side down, wrong side up. We're going to place the ruler from one corner to the other corner, and we're going to make one straight line. And so what color your background fabric is will depend on what color of marking device you want. So if you chose to do a darker background, you're going to need to use a lighter color. Again, as I told you, I use different shades of pink. So I put lines on all of these. So now we are going to go to the sewing machine. So let me stop this. And while I'm doing this, does anybody else have any questions? I didn't know if you did or not. I keep asking that because I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, I'm interrupting. So so that's why I keep asking it. So we turn that off. Let's move the camera. And so everybody's going to see me here. You don't need to see that. All right. Adjust the camera. And now, I like that she got this mouse because this is making it easier so I don't make you guys so seasick. There we go. So I am using a 1/4-inch foot. I do not have in a single hole needle plate, but if you have a single hole needle plate, you should go ahead and use that. All right. So by what the book says, I'm going to take my rectangle here, and I'm going to place my 2.5-inch square on one side of the rectangle. And if I'm looking at the square, I want it to go from bottom left to top right. So my line is in the bottom left corner of my square. And remember, I want the dark at the bottom. So the darker part of your piece needs to be at the bottom and lighter at the top. And now I'm going to sew directly on that line. If you do not have your single hole needle plate in, this would be a good time to put a scrap piece in. But I'm going to sew directly on that line all the way up. You do not need to back tack. Now, if some of you are accustomed to this, I could take my next piece and chain stitch this. And I could place that square on top of the rectangle, and I could go through and chain piece. And again, we are just going to sew directly on the line, like that. And you could continue and just continue chain piecing. Now, we have the squares that are looking like this. So this is how the squares look for cutting with the ruler. If I'm using the AccuQuilt, fiddlesticks. AccuQuilt squares. I just cut them. There's those. There we go. So if I'm using the AccuQuilt, I already know my dark is at the bottom because I cut it that way. So I'm going to take my triangle and I'm going to take my piece and put it on top. Notice here at the bottom, it cut off the dog ears and that lines up perfectly. And I just leave my line at the top. It's going to look sort of, let's see if we can get a better angle on that. It's going to look sort of like this at the top. So your top piece is going to be hanging over a little bit, and that's going to be up a little bit. But my bottom is completely lined up. So now I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch. So I am lining my ruler up I'm lining my foot up at the edge of the cut fabric, and I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam. What that will do, my needle will hit right here at the tip, and then we'll come off the other end. So it got rid of the dog ears. And so then again, if I want to chain piece, I'm putting the 2 pieces together, and I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam. Again, this is using the cuts from the AccuQuilt, the 1/4 inch die and the half square triangles. Now, what we have to do is once we have the pieces that were cut by the AccuQuilt, not by the AccuQuilt, that we cut by the other ones. We have these 2 pieces here. We are going to share. So I have these pieces here. I am going to cut. So here's my rectangle. I'm going to cut this excess side away. And that needs to be turned because now it doesn't look like I'm left-handed. There I go. All right. So my rectangle was like this, and I put this here and I started at the bottom left and went up. I want to cut this top part off. So I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch away from my seam line or from the line that I drew. And we're going to cut we're going to cut this excess off a 1/4 inch away from the seam. And we're going to do this because we have to do this before we go to the next part of the flying geese. So now I have this piece, which now, if we look at my 2 AccuQuilt cuts, it's kind of the same look. So these 2 are my 2 AccuQuilt cuts. These 2 are cut as the book says. These are the 2 AccuQuilt cut with the 1/4 inch square and the half square triangle. You could do this either way. I'm going to show you 2 ways that we could do this. We're going to press this. A lot of people will say to come in and press and set your seam. Well, then you're going to want to press this out. If we do this, don't push really hard and stretch your fabric. You want to get it over and just lightly press it, but you want to make sure it's all the way over. Now, that being said, I found, because I love doing this, this is just me, I don't stretch my fabric as bad, but I know that my seam gets flattened properly. I will press the seam open like that. And I think you guys have seen it before. If you're pressing the seam open, I like to use that wool pressing bar. So if I have my wool pressing bar, I'm going to lay this here, come in and press that open. And it just presses it open really nice. I can then press that down. And my iron turned off. Should have used this Singer. So this is where I like the pressing bar. So if everybody could, I hope everybody could see this. It rolls around the bar. I come in with the iron, and if you have a nice point on the iron, that presses open so nicely. And so here is the AccuQuilt cut. This is what it looks like with the AccuQuilt 1/4 inch. And this is what it will look like with out of the book of when you press it. Now we're going to put the other pieces on there. So now I'm going to take another 2.5-inch square that has another line on it. So I'm now going to put this square on here, and I'm going to stitch from bottom right to top left. So let's move you back. And then on the AccuQuilt one, I am going to just take this piece, place it on here, and notice by doing this, it squares up nicely here and squares up nicely at the top. So with the AccuQuilt, it lines up how you did before. So if you're using the quarter square, this lines up wonderfully. So the AccuQuilt can make this very handy doing the flying geese. It's just that your flying geese will depend on the size of your die cut. They do have a flying geese die, but it's a much larger die. And I was moving the camera so we could go back to the sewing machine. Again, as a reminder, if you need to ask me questions, please stop me. And let's get this up and over. Okay, so I'm now taking the flying geese part and I'm going to sew the other part of it. So I'm now going to do a 1/4 inch down the side. And that sounds like it's not sewing. It's not sewing. Now I must have broke my bobbin thread. Let me rethread that real quickly. So again, I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down the side because that's where it was cut at. And you can see where it's going to come right off the tip there. So we're going to sew that on both of the flying geese. So on this one, this is still the 1/4 inch, and it lines up there and it lines up there, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam. Now, if we look here, this is my piece that is cut that out like they did out of the book. So I took that. I am now going to take one of my 2.5 inch squares again on this one. I'm going to place it on the piece, on the rectangle. And I want my line from going from bottom right to top left. Bottom right, top left. I'm going to sew directly on the line. Again, so I have my rectangle. I'm going to place my 2.5 inch square by 2.5 inch square on top of the rectangle, and and the line should go from bottom right to top left, and I'm going to sew directly on the line. We're going to come back to the cutting board. Sound effects, it makes everything better, right? So I'm coming back to the cutting board from the sewing machine, and here is, and I hate it when I do this. There we go. All right. Now we got, so I'm clipping these because I chain pieced them. Here's my AccuQuilt one, so I don't have to trim anything off of that. The pieces that were that were cut like the book, I'm going to place the ruler, do a 1/4 inch past the seam line and cut. And that's what the backside looked like. But if I'm looking at the front, we want to cut off this piece. So we're going to cut a 1/4 inch away. And then we're going to press. Again, you can press open. Now, picture this if you were doing a bunch of pieces and you had all of these seams pressed open. That a lot of times if I go to press something open, so you see here, if I was laying this down flat to press this open, I could sometimes hit this piece here with the iron and then mess up my piece that was pressed open. If I have the pressing bar and I'm pressing something open, my iron's not going to hit this that I've already pressed. So if you're doing strips, it's not going to interfere with your previously pressed strips. So now I can get that nice and pressed and not disrupt what I've already pressed before. So I like pressing them open, and I'm going to show you. So the next ones, I'm going to show you what it looks like without it pressed open and with it pressed open. So this one is not pressed open. Again, I want my seam down, but I don't want to push really hard. I don't want to stretch that point out. But I want to make sure that if I pull on my fabric, my seam's all the way flat. I don't want it where, here, I'll do a oopsie. I've done this numerous times where sometimes I don't get it pressed all the way over. So say I press it like this, and I'm going to see if I can make this come closer. So I'm saying, oh yeah, it's pressed. But if we look right here and I pull on this, I could see where my fabric was not pressed all the way over. So we want to make sure it gets pressed all the way over, but not push too hard and stretch it. So we have our flying geese. And we're going to, so this is my darker piece. So remember, we're going from dark to light, like this. So our geeses are going to be laid together like this. Same thing with this one. Now I want to sew this to this. So I'm going to take the one from on top of it. I'm going to take the bottom piece and flip it up. And I want to sew across here. So what I want to do is make sure that I either pin it or wonder clip it. So I'm going to wonder clip it there. And I want to make sure that this corner matches up with that corner. And then this corner matches up with the other corner of the flying geese. And I'm going to sew across there. So again, I'm going to show you what I did. I'm going to take the two pieces here. I'm going to take the bottom piece, flip it on top of the piece above it. I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on this part right here. So I'm going to make sure that I clip so that I know I'm sewing this side. Now, why I want to sew that side, we're going to go back to the sewing machine, and I'm going to try to get this as close as possible so you can see the needle. Okay, a little bit up. All right, so we kind of see everybody can see the needle, right? I'm going to place my fabric. So again, I'm going to sew 1/4 inch. So I lined up my corner. I guess we could come back just a little bit. So I'm going to make sure my corner's lined up here, and I'm going to make sure my two corners are lined up on here. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. Now, when we come to the center, this is where we go to not lose our point on the flying geese. I'm going to start sewing, but when I get to the center piece, do you see right here where my blue is meeting my pink? I want my needle to hit right on the blue point or just above the blue point. This is how we do not lose our point, is I really want the needle to hit there. So when I'm sewing, I want my needle, again, to hit right on the blue point. So if I'm at 1/4 inch, it should hit just on the blue point or just above it. So what I'm gonna try to do is, let's see. I'm gonna change the foot so you can hopefully see better on what I mean by where it's supposed to hit. I normally do not use this foot when I'm quilt piecing, but I'm gonna put this foot on because I'm hoping you can see the needle a little bit better where it's gonna hit. So again, I wanna make sure my two corners are lined up. And I'm gonna sew my 1/4 inch. Now, when I get to the center, you can see, now this one I did not, this one I folded it over, I didn't press the last seam. So you see here where the yellow, the pink, and the thread meet. That's where I want my needle to hit. I want it to hit just above it, or right on the point. So we'll show you, so again, I'm going to show you one more time with the seam pressed open.
Thomas, what foot is that?
This one is the seam guide foot with IDT. This foot will do 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 3/8, 1/2 an inch, and 5/8. But I put this foot on here so that you could see, hopefully better, of where that needle's going to hit. So you see this red line here? That's where my needle is. So that line, when I come up to it, you can see where the line should be right at the top of the purple or right above it. So I want my needle to hit right at it or right above it. If we go below that point, so when you see that I've sewn here, I hit right at the blue. So, and let's see if we can show you. All right, so this one, I'm going to show you what it will look like if I accidentally sewed into my point. All right, so now I'm going to move back over to the cutting table. Stop share. Move my camera. All right, now, so I'm going to come in, I'm going to press my seam open. I don't need it that close yet. So because I've been pressing the seams open, I'm just going to continue coming in with the pressing bar and press those seams open. And I didn't disrupt the previous press seams when I first did that. Now, you can see here where I did not lose my point. If we look on my other side where my seam was, this is where I want a little bit closer, is you can see where my seam hit right above the thread point. I could have actually, I should have come down a little bit, I could have come down a little bit closer, then I wouldn't be having a floating point right now. If you go above it, you're going to get a floating point. If on this one, I stitched across the point, so when I fold this open, notice I lose my point. So that's where to not lose your point on your flying geese, when you're sewing, you want to hit right above the point or right on it so that you do not lose it. So here's another one that I sewed right above, right on the point. This one hit exact. This is why I like pressing the seam open, because I can see exactly where that point is. And if I press it over, I have to picture it. So look here, I have no floating point. And I was able to hit that closer because I pressed my seam open. So notice I did not lose my point, but I do not have a floating point. And again, if that does not make sense, I'll put the two together. Notice I can see a little bit of pink between this flying geese and this one. So, and sometimes you might have a little bit wider. Let's see if I boo-booed on. Well, no, actually, I can't say I boo-booed. This one here was one of my best flying geese I've ever done. My points, I didn't lose a single point, and I don't have any floating points. So this was, I was very proud of this one because I didn't lose my point, but I don't have floating points. So again, a floating point is I'm seeing a little bit of the background between, which is okay. That still looks good. What doesn't look good is when you lose your point. And I just had that piece that fell on the floor.
Thomas,
Yes.
do you press all of your quilt pieces open or just angles or
If
this
I'm doing
particular
it
pattern?
where I'm matching up points, every time that I have to match up points, this is a personal preference. I always press my seams open because I personally can get them lined up easier. I'm not, so when people say press to one side and then the other one press to the other side so that you can butt the seams up, I don't get it lined up, and that's me. So I personally like to press them open because it works better for me. But when I pressed it open, like this one was not pressed open. I had to line it up with the thread line and where the pink and the yellow meet. This one was pressed open, and because it was pressed open, I could see exactly where my blue point was. This is exactly where my point is. So I knew where it was, and it wasn't as much of a guess. I could get it right on, which is what I did. That's a personal preference. Some people do not like seams pressed open because they do not feel that the quilt is going to be as stable. And I'm not going to disagree with that or agree with it. Because if you're going to quilt it and not tie it or tack it, as some people will say, it's going to lock it down anyways. But that's a personal preference of me pressing the seams open. The other reason why I like to press seams open with points, I don't feel that my points get as thick. When I'm meeting like 6 or 8 points together, if I press them open, that center point does not seem to get as thick. I know there's a technique where you can come in and clip, turn them, and fan them. I haven't mastered that, but it works well with me for pressing them open. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. It works well for me. And I like doing it because I can get those points lined up really close. And that's why I do it, is because it makes my points look good.
One of the biggest problems I've had in switching from sort of regular garment sewing to quilting is my habit is just to automatically press seams open, and it's almost in my muscle memory now to just stitch and press open, stitch, press open. And so I've been sort of struggling with trying to press to one side. So I'm glad to hear you say that pressing open works for you, because I kind of feel like I have permission now to do that on the points, because I've been struggling getting perfect points like that.
Now here's the other thing is, so that say that I'm pressing, let's go back here. This is where you got to remember there's pressing and there's ironing. Okay. We don't want to,
Right.
Say that I want this. What some people will sometimes do is go in here and push down with their iron and then push that all the way up like this to get this flat. Well, now this is completely wonky.
Right.
So when you're doing this, you got to be careful of I want it pressed open here, but I don't want to distort the edge. So then I got to come in and press. Ironing is we're just shoving it every direction. So we want to press it down and make sure our seam is nice. I also find if I'm folding it over like this, sometimes this is where I was talking about before. Let me stitch something real quickly, see if I can get it to mimic. So sometimes I see people where they'll come in and they'll kind of fold it over and then they'll go like this and they're not distorting it, but they didn't get the full seam open. So you can see where all of a sudden I'm pulling on this and I don't have the full seam. Well, that takes almost that could take up to 1/8 of an inch off of your block. And that can really throw your block off, especially paper piecing. And I'm not, and I do it all the time. I've done this all the time. So don't think that I do this. So I say that because I do that and I try to avoid it. I could pick up when other people have done it. And there's somebody on here, I'm not going to call her out, but there's somebody on here. She came in with the piece and we couldn't get the point to line up until I noticed that it needed to be pushed. She was doing a paper piecing and she didn't get it completely folded over. And it's a very easy thing to do. So on paper piecing, it's kind of the same. Paper piecing, you don't press open. So on this, I press open because I feel like I can get that seam more flat. But I will also agree with some people when set your seam first, then come in and press it open. So I can come in, set my seam, press it open, and then I get a really nice crisp line. The other reason why I like to press seams open is if I'm doing long strips. So say like I'm sewing 2.5-inch strips together and I'm going to cut them down for whatever. If I press my seam open and I press along the seam, my seam will stay straighter. So that when I'm cutting those down, all of a sudden it's not getting wonky. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. That's all that I had today. I showed you how to put the geese together. You just sew them like that, and then you just sew your rows together. So that's actually how you put your geese together. Next week, we are going to be doing Zen check. There's rectangles. So you're taking strips, rectangles, you're sewing them together. What I did, so if you want to kind of brainstorm on this one, pick a print that you like. So what I did is I picked this green print. Let's see if I can get it closer. That has purple, oranges, yellows, and some hint of blues. So I picked this one, and then I brought this one to help bring in this blue. So I picked 1 or 2 prints that I liked, and then I pulled all these other non-busy colors out. So what we're going to do next week is this one on piecing together the Zen check. So that one's rectangles and squares, and you do it in block sections. So this one, I'm going to be showing you about the block sections of how they're going together to make the Zen check. So this one is fun to play with. Just find a really crazy wild print and then blend the other ones with it. So you could take something, so you see I got an extreme green, went to blue, purple. It was just a fun way to play with colors. So if you notice, okay, it's not pink. There is no pink in here. And you know pink is my favorite color. So I was really happy on how this turned out. Okay, yeah, there's like a little light lavender, but it's not pink. So there's absolutely no pink in here, which this is where just find a fun piece that you like, pull it out, and then pull out just little remnants fabrics. So this is a great way of like, oh, I have part of a fat eighth or something like that. This is where you get to play with those little scrap pieces.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right. I hope to see everybody in the next class. If I haven't looked at who signed up or not. But everybody take care. Enjoy the warm weather, and I will see you soon.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
See ya.
you.
Thanks, Thomas.
Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.